The place where I live in is in a forest area on a small island in Borneo. We have been living here for quite a while, about 40 years or more. This was and still is my parents' place. We were always told by our late grandfather that the trees here have spirits living in them. I think you can call it haunted. He used to tell us that he sees it sometimes, especially in the wee hours when he makes his rounds, making sure there were no burglars or any type of threats towards us. He was our guardian, vigilant and always ready. He would make his rounds at 4 p.m. every single day, built like a bodybuilder and tough as nails. He was well respected in our small community, hence why we believed him when he told us about the witches and warlocks of our village. There was a woman spirit that would make her rounds of the woods around our property, and Grandpa would always see her. I remember one day when I was sleeping alone on the master bedroom, and in my dreamy state, I saw a woman wearing sleep robes, and I honestly have to say that she was beautiful. I was so much in awe, my jaw must have dropped when I saw her from behind. I couldn't see her face as her hair was blocking it, but that's what I assumed. I know, silly me for wishful thinking. Don't judge me, as I was still relatively young at the time, so blame it on the raging hormones. I couldn't move my body. I was frozen. Call it sleep paralysis, but I remember vividly when the figure moved slowly across my bed. It moved in such a lustful way that I thought I was going to get raped by this demon. Then suddenly, it was on top of me, and its face was just blank, like a blank canvas. It has no nose, no mouth, no eyes, but I could tell it was looking straight into my soul. I struggled to move, but I couldn't get myself free of this spirit that was spinning me down. I tried to pray the Our Father, but kept messing up the words in my head. Then the worst happened. It started to choke me. I felt her grip on my throat, blocking my airways, and I honestly thought that I was going to die that night. But I tried harder to move and get free, but in the end, I passed out from her choking. Miraculously, I woke up the next day thinking I was dead, but thank God I survived. And from that day onwards, I always sleep with the lights on. Continuing on from the previous story, the area where I live in is somewhat of a rural part of the island. It's on a hill and the roads are creepy at night, where you have to pass through lots of banana trees and bushes to get to our house. So the setting at night can give someone who is not a brave soul the shivers if you're not used to these kinds of place, where no one hears you if you scream as the next door neighbors are not close by. When I was about 10 years old, I used to see a bonfire at the front yard and people around it chanting and dancing like in the movies. And that was all I thought of it, me imagining them in my head. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I could really see spirits when I was younger, and now thinking back, I know that I had actually seen these chantings like it was some kind of ritual. And that brings us to this story. The local folk here know that there was a shaman living within the village among the many residents here, but what many of them didn't know was that this shaman performed abortions and was dwelling in the dark arts of black magic. So one day, when me and my buddies were cycling around the village, we happened to stop in front of the alleged shaman house. We got the hint because of the way the house was built. Wooden rotten house with a lot of bamboo growing around the whole house. It was creepy, and so us being nosy teenagers decided to check the place out. We parked our bikes outside the property and started to walk up the front porch. There were dolls hanging inside the house, small ones that looked like they were hand-sewn. The place was bare except for rubbish scattered around, and the only way I can explain the atmosphere was that it felt heavy, like the oxygen was being drained from us, from something that we could not see. The whole house had a very weird musty smell, and it was sickening to know that it was once used to murder innocent babies. It was sad to imagine the lives that could have been lived but instead taken from them by their own parent, as it is still very much against the law to abort a child in my country. So most young girls who got pregnant on accident wanted nothing to do with having a child outside of marriage, so they come to these kinds of places as a solution. Hence why it is so dangerous for these girls to go through such a thing with an untrained shaman. Some of these did not go well for the mothers as well, so there were definitely angry and unclean spirits still roaming in that house, and the longer we stayed there, the more we felt sick to our stomachs. So we decided to move along and go home. It was when we were on our bikes that we heard something coming from the inside of the house. At first it was faint, but it grew louder and louder. It was laughter, the kind where you could hear the evil in their voice. Then we saw smoke started coming out of the roof, and before we could see anything else, we booked it out of there and went straight home. And since then, we never went anywhere near that house, ever again. I used to sleep with my windows wide open to let in the cold air, as the island that I reside in is quite hot and humid. So with the safety grill and also mosquito net, it was very soothing to let the fresh air into the room at night when I sleep. It was the whole night experience of insects and the occasional wind noise that was also soothing. I also loved to leave the windows wide open so I could see the light of the moon and, like I said, the night experience. However, one night changed it all. When I was about to sleep and still looking out the wide open window, I felt a cold breeze pass through, and all of a sudden I could hear Manic laughing. At first I thought I was dreaming, but I knew at the moment that I have not fallen asleep and was very much awake. Then, as if on cue, I saw what looked like a woman's figure flying past by. Then I closed and opened my eyes again to make sure, and there it was, a woman flying past by my open window. The woman was on a broomstick and had a nose like of a bird's, like the ones you see in cartoons and movies with witches in them. You heard me right. I saw a living witch, and the only way I can describe her laughter was maniacal. I froze in my bed, and I didn't know what to do at the moment. I perched up to see if the woman would pass again, but the laughing disappeared, and all went silent. I got up and closed all the windows and blinds, and never opened the windows at night again to avoid seeing that again. I believe that these were witches roaming around my village, as it was a full moon at the time. This part of the island has always had a creepy vibe to it. I was told by my late grandmother that these parts of our land were once used as a spot where during World War II the Japanese used to massacre their captives by chopping off their heads, and made a dumping ground around our property. Coupled with thick jungle, you can imagine the aura that we are living in, which is dark and unnerving. Yet we managed to live here until now. I remember one time that our gate was pushed as it was not fully installed in place while my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister. I saw the whole incident in front of me, and I was only about 8 or 9 years old at the time, but I remember vividly how it happened. The gate only started to fall when my mother turned her back to it, and it looked like it was deliberately pushed, and my mother fell to her knees while the heavy gate was on top of her. It all happened in a matter of seconds, and all I could remember after that was my father and cousins screaming and running towards my mother to lift up the gate. It took 3 of them to lift the gate, and fortunately, my mother and sister didn't sustain any injuries as she came out a healthy kid. My father was a big skeptic regarding the paranormal and always told us that it was all coincidence and that we imagined it all, as he never saw or experienced it himself. Until one day when he was sleeping on his bed alone and felt someone kick him off the bed. Dazed and still in a sleepy state, He told us about the incident, but still didn't believe it was paranormal. He just said that it was unexplainable and was never deterred on staying on this island. One time, I also saw a figure pass by our kitchen when I went to get some water. The figure was a black mass, like a shadow on the wall, but I knew that the thing was looking straight at me, and with eyes wide open, I just froze and stared at it. Then, in a few seconds, which felt like hours, the figure just disappeared into the window, but I was already so spooked that I ran back to the hall where my whole family was watching television. I came in screaming, telling them what I had just witnessed, and my mother, being the strong Christian, went into the kitchen. Armed with holy water, she started praying and sprinkling it all over our house. She also felt it and knew the spirit was still roaming around the house and only left after intense prayer. This is a compilation of paranormal stories that me and my family have experienced in and around our home. I want to start off by saying that my mother is a devout Christian and she was not afraid of spirits or demons as she would call them. She used to hear chantings and talking but couldn't understand the language while she was praying at night, as if these spirits were trying to stop her from praying and distracting her as much as they could, so she would stop. But my mother would never let these spirits deter her from praying, and so she would pray even harder to fend them off. On one occasion, while she was praying, one of these spirits came to disturb her. She took holy water and sprinkled it upwards where the voices were coming from, and immediately she heard screams of pain as if they were splashed with hot boiling water, and my mother would describe this as spiritual warfare. Night after night, she would repeat this and never gave up the fight. Kudos to you, Mom. Although she had a solid faith, there were times when these spirits would torment my mother in different ways. For a few months, she would be disturbed by a male spirit, where it would come to her when she was about to sleep and would feel a hairy spirit sit on her chest to a point where my mother couldn't breathe. It was like dog's fur, thick and had a foul smell. All my mother could do was pray harder and rebuke it until it would eventually leave, but then come back the next night to torment her again. It got to a point where my mother would leave all the lights on while she slept, and she couldn't get much sleep and would be screaming to them to just leave her alone. This disturbed us deeply, and I would run downstairs to see what was happening when I hear her screaming at something that we couldn't see. I believed her, as when I would come downstairs, the hairs on my arms would stand, and I could feel the evil presence and sometimes smell something musty, like wet dog smell around the house, but see no animals around, and as quickly as it came, it would disappear.